Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. We'd love to hear where you're from and what your favorite action movie is today.
All right, I'll jump in. Nice. Welcome from Ohio. New York. I have never seen any of the Jason Bourne movies. I need to add those to my viewing list.
Oh, you absolutely do. I'm a movie junkie. They're great.
And anything Matt Damon is always, I like him. But I just forget about those movies when we're going to watch something new or old. All right, we've got a lot of great people signing on. Thanks for joining us. Please join us in the chat. We're just doing an opening introduction of where are you from and telling us what action movie you enjoy. And another Tampa, Florida person. I just watched The Italian Job again this weekend. Love that. Nothing wrong with Harry Potter. Oh, nice. Classic, Kim.
Thank you.
There's another gladiator with you.
There is another gladiator. I'm trying to think of which ones. I'm a huge action movie fan, so. But there's
action movies and the topic of conflict go well together.
Yes. Oh, I like The First Taken as well. That was a really good movie with Liam Neeson.
I haven't heard of Brave. But nice that we have someone here from Mexico. Welcome.
Yes.
I'll have to check that one out. All right. Well, I think it's at time. Should we go ahead and get started? Thanks, everybody, for giving your movie suggestions. And for those of you who haven't had a chance yet, please fill in the chat while we get going. We are really grateful to have you with us today. We picked this theme earlier on in the year when we were looking at planning the Omnia calendar and thought that addressing conflict was a nice theme to go with July and the American Revolution and all the themes that happen in America around this time of year. Little did we know that our country and the world would be dealing with other conflicts at this time. So I don't think the topic could be any more on point. And we can see from the participation that we've gotten on this series that seems to be a hot topic. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy it. Let me go ahead and introduce us. I'll start off. First of all, my name is Heather Snyder. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at the Omnia Group. And I have just joined Omnia actually this year. I joined in February. But prior to here, and always, I've spent my entire career dedicated to the people side of business, helping organizations hire, engage, and develop a collaborative group that can increase productivity and client service and business impact. So I'm very excited to have joined Omnia, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Kim Bussey, to introduce herself.
Thank you, Heather. My name is Kim Bussey. I'm the Key Relationship Manager here at Omnia. I have worked with Omnia for almost 10 years now and have the honor to partner with our clients not only on the employee selection side, but also for leadership development, employee development, and how to any special projects on management and team dynamics. So that combines my love of business development and people management, which I've been in that business for 25 years. And love working with that leadership development piece, and very happy to be with you today.
Great. Thanks, Kim. And for those of you just joining, we've got an active chat going where we're introducing ourselves to the community here. So please take a moment, tell us where you're from. And we've asked also for your favorite action movie going in line with the theme of conflict. So our agenda today is, first of all, we're going to all get on the same page and level set on the definition of conflict, and we'll share some view on that. And then we'll talk about catalysts, what causes, what triggers conflict. And then we'll talk about how to use behavioral traits to identify the way people address or don't address conflict in their teams. And then we'll go over some best practices so that you can help address this conflict and, more importantly, build better team unity by doing so. First, just a little bit about who we are. We know we've got a lot of folks that are new to Omnia joining us today who may not have heard much about us. We have been in business since 1985, and we provide tools, resources, and a variety of services that help organizations hire the best people and primarily develop them to their full potential. We have a scientifically valid workforce assessment tool. We cover over 200 specific benchmarks across a variety of industries. So we'll give you a chance to learn more about us at the end with some opportunities to click on our resources. So let's go on, though, with the topic at hand, dealing with conflict. So Kim, tell us how we define conflict.
Yeah, so conflict defined, and I think that is where we really need to start off, because when we talk about conflict, it could be many different things. So how we're going to talk about it right now is that conflict is defined as friction or opposition resulting from actual or perceived differences or incompatibilities. And I think the key word here is that could be perceived differences. And so when we talk about these perceived differences, one, it is something that a lot of times we think of conflict and we only view it from our viewpoint and our perspective of where, and I love that comment, we're working on the background noise. I am so sorry that it is a difficulty. We're working on trying to make that a little bit better, but yes, it can be a conflict because it's a friction right now. So as we're talking, what I want us to remember is that when we think of conflict, we approach it from our aspect. And when we talk about it's our aspect, it's our perspective. So our natural behavioral traits and also our work experience. And so we want to level set with the definition of conflict so that we can really define the sources and the next steps when it comes to it. Because if we all walk into conflict with a different opinion of what it is, some people think it's just something horrible. Some people look at it as, okay, this is productive. Conflict can be productive because it's going to help us find the answer. But if we don't level set that, and if you don't level set that in your team to have the same understanding of what conflict is, then it's going to be even harder to overcome it. So when we talk about what the sources of conflict are, the conflict catalyst, we find that many times these are based in behaviors, in our natural behavioral traits. So poor communication, well, sometimes that poor communication can be no communication at all. So you have someone who would prefer to shut down, not talk at all, or I think I'm giving clear instructions. We're all on the same page, and guess what? We aren't. We are on totally, completely different pages. Or the information that I've given, Heather's looking at me like, I have no idea what you're saying. Can you explain it? I have questions for it. And so understanding that this particular conflict, and many of the conflicts that we're going to talk about, guess what, are easily overcome as long as everyone is in tune with it. The other conflict catalyst is the different conflict styles, and we're going to talk about that in just a few moments. As I said, I don't think anyone gets up and goes, today I'm going to have conflict. Woohoo! We don't look for it, but for some of us, we want to handle it. Our viewpoint is, let's deal with it right away. Someone else may look, if I don't look, it can't see me, avoid, avoid, avoid. You've got to find that what those different conflict styles are, and then have everyone work together. Here at Omnia, I always like to say it's a three-pronged approach. One, self-awareness. So as leaders or as people, we have to be aware of what our conflict style is. Awareness of others, and then adapt and apply what we know to really work towards that team unity. The third one is different values. Now, this one is a little bit more complicated to overcome, but it can cause a catalyst. And this is why it's so critical to hire the right person for the right position from the very beginning in that selection process. Because the different values could be pre-COVID, I want to work from home 100% of the time, and the office that they're coming into there is no working from home. All right, so 20% of the time. Or there's a difference in values on how far you will let your salespeople go to make a sale. Well, guess what? If that one salesperson comes in with, there is nothing that's too far, there's no line I won't cross to make a sale, and you're saying, wait, that's not how we operate, you're going to have conflict. And so really understanding the values of integrity, honesty, diversity. What are their values in diversity, and how do they embrace that inclusion, which is a whole different subject for a different webinar, but that can cause the conflict. The fourth one is workplace competition. Now, I like a little bit of friendly competition in my workplace. Most of your salespeople and producers do. They want to know, where am I on the leaderboard? Oh, Kevin, you're number one this week. Guess what? I'm coming for you, and I'm going to take your position. And if it's friendly back, Kevin will go, oh, no, you aren't, but we're going to work together. And we know that in our quest to be the best, we're helping the company be the best. But there are some people whose natural behavioral insight is that they don't want to compete with each other. They want to say, okay, what's our team goals? How can we come together and work for it? If you create a workplace environment where it's me against Heather, or us against them, sales versus service, what's going to happen is that some people may leave and not even tell you why, that silent just exit because they don't like it. Or you may have people who take that competition to an unhealthy place where they're talking more about, I'm going to undercut Heather by taking her prospects. And now instead of this competition that's bringing your team together, it's pitting us against each other. It could possibly introduce something that you may consider on the low end of that ethical or even unethical business practices. Or it's going to create an environment where I'm not going to share any of my best practices. So I know someone said Finding Nemo. One of my favorite lines out of Finding Nemo is mine, mine, mine. This is the eagle going mine, mine, mine. You're going to have people going mine, mine, mine. These are my clients. These are my prospects. These are my best practices. I'm not going to share. So you have to be very careful with having that fine line of workplace competition. And then last but not least is situational stressors. Now, typically the situational stressors can be temporary. And we are living in the middle of a temporary stress, a situational stressor with COVID-19, with the pandemic. So whether you chose to have people working remotely, if you're a global company and now you're trying to figure out, okay, who has mask mandates, who doesn't? What are we looking for? Do I bring one state back and let the other state work remote? And then you add in those stressors that people are feeling as well with remote learning. Now it's about time for kids to go back to school. And do I allow my child to go back to school? Do I send them back to school because I'm having to go back into the office? People are being laid off, furloughed. All of those situational stressors can cause emotions to run high, to cause frustrations to run high, and it's going to cause conflict. Outside of COVID, just a situational stressor such as a merger and acquisition or a simple change in workflow processes could cause some people to have to reevaluate and have some stress. So as I said, most of these are based in behavioral insight. And when we talk about behavioral insight and conflict, here's what we know is on those catalysts, when you understand the impact of behaviors on the catalyst, it's going to help you to create that team unity. In addition, when you recognize you and your employees' conflict style, it gives you that opportunity to say, okay, do I need to wait a little bit to talk to them about this? Is it something that we address immediately? Am I going to have to ask more probing questions to get them to open up? And then also when we think about behavioral insight and its impact on conflict, and more importantly, conflict resolution, it's going to enhance your ability to navigate the 3 stages of conflict. And this is really critical because, as I said, it's self-awareness, it's awareness of your team and your peers, and then how do we evolve and adapt to make it better. Here at Omnia, we can help you with that. And I want to just touch base on this. We measure those behavioral insights in 4 different ways. Here at Omnia and the rest of the webinar, you may hear us talking columns, like column 1, column 2, and you're thinking, what does that mean? Well, at Omnia, we convert results into an 8-column graph, and we look at them in pairings. And so columns 1 and 2 measure that person's level of assertiveness. Remember, I said some people want to dive into it, and some people want to avoid conflict. Assertiveness is going to tell us that. Columns 3 and 4 is the communication style, and not just how they communicate, but their thought processes. Are they relational versus analytical? Are they intuitive versus let me think it through? 5 and 6 is pace and adaptability, and that gives us insight into how are they going to adapt to change? How are they going to feel comfortable with moving through things and understanding it? And then 7 and 8 is that need for structure. So once again, some people are very resilient. They don't take it personally when they receive feedback. Other people are perfectionists and they like a lot of structure. So going back to poor communication, if you're a person who's big picture and you're talking to someone who likes a lot of details, that's going to create a conflict right there for you. But when you understand that about yourself and about the person that you're working with, you can move forward with it. And so, as I said, you may hear some columns speak, and if you do, that's okay. Just stay tuned with us. So let's talk about those conflict styles. And so there are conflict styles that are widely accepted. They were developed by behavioral scientists Kenneth Thomas and Hillman. And when we look at these, we can gain a better understanding of the impact of our personal conflict styles. And once again, it starts with ourselves. So once we move forward, we can understand this. So the first conflict style that Kenneth and Ralph talk about is avoiding. And that is, I lose, you lose. And really what we see is when we have someone who is on the lower end of the assertiveness scale, so someone who's a much taller column 2, their type of conflict is, I don't see it, I don't hear it, it doesn't exist. But what the problem with that is that we can't deliberately ignore or withdraw from conflict because then it is unresolved. What happens then is that conflict style is going to have task after task after task after stack on top of it. And before you know it, now the problem that we hoped was resolved is not resolved, and it can blow up like a volcano. Or it can blow up into someone storming out or giving you a list of 6 months of things that have happened, and you're just like, where did all this come from? The second one is competing, where I win, you lose. Now, what we see is a highly assertive and competitive person tends to fall into this competing conflict style if they are not self-aware. And we see this sometimes with leaders who are highly assertive. So they'll say, okay, we're working on a webinar, and I think that this is let's talk about what the presentation should look like. I think it should look like this. And now someone else, especially if they're working with an avoiding style, isn't going to speak up at all. And when I say I win, you lose, then it's also someone is clearly just, okay, whatever you want. Now, a competing conflict style and a competing when it's in making decisions is critical in a crisis situation. So as much as we want to have team unity and everyone come together and collaborate, if there is a fire in the building, you don't want to say, okay, what do we need to do? You want to have clear, everyone grab your purses or your briefcase and exit the building. That's a crisis. When it comes to COVID right now, 19, when you made the decision, if you did, to go remote, that was something that senior leadership made. We're going remote. You may have taken a survey to ask opinions, but at the end of the day, it's a crisis. Make a decision. Collaborating, a conflict style, is an I win, you win. And so this is really great when you're trying to bring in team unity. So we're working on a webinar. So Heather and I, when we were creating this presentation, we had a back and forth. We had a discussion with it. I gave a little bit, she gave a little bit. We integrated our two ideas to come up with a great project. Now, what you want to make sure is if you're working with someone who has this collaborating style, that one, it is an instance where you need to have it. So once again, if you're creating solid processes and procedures that affects federal regulation, you may not want to use this collaborating. But if you're looking at creating playbooks or a new sales process, the collaborating will be helpful. Once again, you also want to look at the time constraints, because if you have a tight time constraint, collaborating may not be the best style to go for. Compromising is the next one. So I win some, you win some, and we may think, hey, wait, collaborating and compromising is awesome. We love this. Well, with the compromising, what you have to make sure of is that it's not just a settled resolution. And especially with compromising, it can sometimes cause resentment if there is a difference in power structure. And so, for instance, I report to Heather. If Heather goes, I ask her and she's winning, and I feel like she's winning all the time and she's giving me something small, like, oh, Kim, you can talk first on the webinar. It could build up some resentment because I'm thinking, well, you're just throwing me the little bits that you don't want to make me happy. And so you've got to make sure that when you're working with your team and when you're looking at this compromising, is it truly a compromise? Is everyone have equal say and equal power regardless of the title? And then the last one is accommodating. So I lose, you win. We see this a lot within certain behavioral traits within Omnia. So if someone has a taller column 2 and a taller column 3, so they're team-oriented and they're very relational, they may struggle to say no. This could be you. You may struggle to say no. And so it's just automatically, yep, oh no, that's a great idea. Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. We'll just go with the flow. Well, once you hit that point where someone is like, I don't feel like I'm heard. I don't feel like my ideas matter. I give up everything. I lose at everything because you win. That's going to affect their morale. And they could either create a triangle with, once again, I did this for Emma and she didn't recognize it. Once again, I gave this to Emma. And now that person is creating conflict within your team. So it's critical to understand these 5 conflict styles, who you are. And now that we've talked about it, I want to go to a quick poll. So in your chat, if you'll switch over to polls, there is a poll that asks, are you dealing with a particular style of conflict right now? So if you think you're dealing with that avoiding or competing, go ahead and select that, collaborating, compromising, accommodating, and we'll give it just a moment for people to make their selections.
While they're doing that, let's do a little time check because I'm getting ready to speak and want to make sure I'm not causing feedback. How's that sound, Kim?
It sounds great to me, but let me flip over to the chat real quick to see if we're hearing anything else.
Great.
Much better. Perfect.
Okay, let's hope it stands. So back to the poll. It looks like the majority of our folks are dealing with competing styles of conflict, and then we also have some accommodating and avoiding going on. All quite common, and a little bit of compromising. Great, thank you for that participation, and we'll factor that into the rest of our discussion. So competing definitely won out with 50% of our poll saying competing conflict, 20% accommodating, and 18% avoiding. So let's talk a little bit about the stages of conflict. We've talked about the catalysts, the triggers, the different styles. We want to share a little bit of what we've learned. Former federal mediator Christopher Moore, who was a federal mediator for his entire career, wrote a book. It's now on its fourth copy, called The Mediation Process. And in that book, he talks about 3 stages of conflict. And each stage is marked by the characteristics and the circumstances of that. And knowing about these stages can help us identify and be more aware, as Kim said, about being aware first before you address and adapt. to the degree in which conflict is escalating. And the three stages are latent, emergent, and manifest. In the latent stage, it's not very well known. The conflict may only be known to some, or it may be just a small incident in certain circumstances. Emergent conflict means the conflict is getting more pervasive. People may be knowing more about it. People may be taking sides. There are clear issues at stake, but no resolution. And then finally, the last stage of conflict, and probably the most concerning, is when it becomes manifesting. There is open, fueling hostility, again, with no resolution. So we're going to go into each of these phases and talk about what happens in them, and then what we as leaders can do to address those phases. What happens a lot is in these phases, you'll see a lot of avoiding, competition, and even some accommodating going on. So we'll talk about that. So first, let's talk about latent conflict. In the stage of latent conflict, it means that there are a few people who know about the issue, but they may not be forthcoming with it, or there may be only certain parties involved in it. This is when rumors can start, or people can start to feel left out if they think some decisions are being made that they're not involved in. Going back to our movie topics, I have just become enamored with Hamilton, love the music, even more obsessed now that I can watch it anytime on TV. And this conflict reminds me of when Burr sings about not being in the room where it's happening. Latent conflict can happen in government, politics, where decisions are being made. So say, for example, in your city, a developer is looking at coming in to put in a new site, a new business, and lobbying is going on. But everybody affected may not know about it yet. This is when rumors can fly as well. Taking it back to the work setting, I head up sales. In sales, whenever there are decisions being made about territories or compensation, people do start to get a little stressed out about that. So take, for example, you hire a brand new salesperson to join your team, and you might not have come out yet with how you're going to deal with the territories now that you've added somebody on the staff. This is when rumors start flying, and if it's not addressed openly, it can get in the way of productivity. So what do we do to deal with latent conflict? First of all, be proactive. Even if you don't know the answers yet, put out there that there are some decisions that need to be made, and ask questions, ask people for input, ask them what concerns they have, and start dealing with any kind of situational stressors that may be happening. Then you can avoid that conflict festering and moving on into a more emergent conflict, which Kim will talk about next.
Yes, so the emergent is where, in this stage of conflict, most, if not all, of the issues are known. So once again, you know who it is, you've identified the party. So if there is that triangle, you know who the main players are for the most part, but there's no clear resolution. So instead of me going to Heather, I've gone to someone else. And it's just kind of building. And I always like to say emergent is like that pot of water that you put on to boil, and you're starting to see the bubbles rise to the top. So you're seeing some of it, but we don't have that full bowl. And it's a great time to end it before we get there. And how you can do that is by encouraging them to resolve the conflict. So if you know who the main players are, either because they've come to you and said, I can't deal with this anymore, this producer never gets me the information I need, or this service person never hits my deadlines, ask the simple question, have you talked to them about it? And if they don't know how to have that conversation, because no, I haven't talked to her because every time I do, she cuts me off. Now you're available as that facilitator. So you can give them tools on what to say, how to say it. Maybe you're role playing through some scenarios. If they come back to you and say, yes, we've talked about it, but we can't get through it, be available as a facilitator. Now, a facilitator is different than someone who's resolving the conflict, because you can't make other people resolve a conflict between them, but you can help guide them through that. So as a leader, we can't go in and say, don't have conflict. Well, we can say, let's talk about it, because many times when we have that facilitator, I'm listening to one person, so I'm listening to Bill, and then I listen to Scott, and they're saying the same thing. but they don't hear it because of their own perceptions. And then hold people accountable. And accountability is critical, not only for yourself, because if you're saying, I want you to resolve conflict and you're an avoiding conflict style, then now you've got to step outside of your comfort zone as well. But then also, if you've talked to people and you said, okay, I encourage you to talk to each other, then check back in with them. Heather, did you have that conversation with Emma yet? No, not yet. Okay, what's stopping you? If it's a legitimate reason she's on vacation for the next week, okay, I can understand that. If it's like we're all kind of busy right now, then that's when you can hold them accountable and say, let's have a conversation, and it needs to happen. It needs to be on the books and scheduled by Friday at 5 o'clock. Hopefully we can nip that conflict in the bud before it comes to the manifest stage, because the manifest stage is where not only is your pot of water boiling, it is boiling over. And so the indicators are there's arguing, there's conflict is out in the open, and parties are committed to their side. He's wrong, I'm right, I'm not compromising, you need to deal with them, we're not talking to them, service is bad, sales is bad, we're just all mad. In your role, that's when it's time to mediate. And you really have to come in and say, okay, we're working through this together. Because an example of this is, once again, you have two employees who refuse to work together. Maybe it's sales versus service, and this CSR or this customer service says, they just won't get me what I need. When you do that, when you bring them together to mediate, you're going to start recognizing those conditions that are adding fuel to the fire. So is it poor timelines? Is it a lack of process? Is it just maybe personality conflicts? And we see this a lot because they complement each other, but until they begin to appreciate their strengths, they're not going to work as well together. Because trust me, you don't want me in your accounting department. I don't have an attention to detail, but I value our accountants because we're making the sales, they're making sure we get paid. It's a complement team. And then as a leader, you have to confront the tension. Once it's reached the manifest stage, you have no other options than to confront the tension, because what's happening is it's beginning to tear your team apart. And even if you have someone who is not in the conflict, top talent doesn't want to go into a workplace that they dread the fighting and fussing. They're going to find another position. And so for retention purposes, it is critical that you confront the tension. And so, Keller, what are some strategies for managing that conflict?
Sure. So when you think about it, I think, again, back to the awareness of, again, really identifying what are the styles and the behaviors of the conflict that you're dealing with, the people dealing with the conflict, and then where are you in the stage of conflict? And first and foremost, we as leaders have to be willing to take the action. So the first thing is setting the stage. I think as a leader, the most important thing you need to do is set your expectation that the conflict is dealt with. And back to the poll, we're seeing organizations having a lot of competitiveness in their culture, a lot of competition, or we're seeing avoidance. The leader needs to speak up and say, this is what I expect of this team. I expect that we are going to work for win-win and that we are going to address conflict head on. One of the best things you could do to set the stage is to encourage the people to talk to each other. So it shouldn't necessarily need to escalate to a point where you have to get involved and escalate. If people have the skills and the tools and the self-confidence to talk to each other, and you, again, can help the leader develop your team, give them skills to address conflict. If they're not high on that assertiveness column that we talked about, help them role play, think through how they can address it in a very neutral environment. So speaking of neutral, that's the other role of the leader. If you're going to facilitate the conversation, which if you're getting into further stages of the conflict, it's very likely that you're now going to have to be the facilitator. It's really key that as a leader, you remain neutral. You cannot pick sides. You may have a favorite in this situation. You may have someone that you have hired and developed and mentored, and you just are in their court, and you may think that the other person isn't being fair or reasonable. You cannot let that be transparent or apparent in the conversation you're facilitating. You must stay neutral. Same as if you've got departmental conflict that you're leading. We talked about Sometimes there is friction between accounting and sales. Maybe sales isn't giving all the information to the accounting department they need to do the invoicing or the client service follow through, and personalities are getting in the way of this. You can't take sides here either. You've got to work with your fellow leader, your colleague, work together to solve the conflict together, with each leader staying in the neutral zone, because once you get into these high conflicts, emotions run high as well. Another key thing is to respect differences. People are going to come to the conflict with varying degrees of experiences. Like Kim said earlier, values do play into this. If you've got people who are very conflict avoidance, again, you've got to help them and respect that this may be the first time that they've ever dealt with something like this, or they may have something in their background that is causing them to look at this in a very different way that may seem irrational to you. The more you can get to the bottom of that separately outside to help facilitate the conversation inside the circle of the conversation, the better. But again, to respect and honor all differences. Some people may need to process more. Maybe it's a chance of writing out what the tension is and having a chance to look at it in a very clear, less emotional way. So writing things out first, then coming to the discussion. So honor and respect the way people learn, communicate, personality traits, all of those things factor in. And then finally, as the leader, you've got to be willing to take the next step. That means you might have to make the decision, and you're going to have to, again, address conflict on your own then, because some people may be disappointed. There may be a compromise involved, but you've got to be willing to take that step. You also may come back to finding out that it really is the person who's involved and is the problem. Some people love a good fight. Some people like to just churn up challenges and trouble. And I'll just say those people are toxic on your team, and everyone gets worn down by those kinds of people. So as a leader, start looking for those trends and themes and be willing to address the personal side of it if that's what's causing it. If you've got a person or you've got a department that can work with everybody else, but they're having a challenge with this one single person, it may just be that person. So those are some key ways to just really make sure you deal with the conflict head on and help your folks get through it. So in summary, want to just cover off some of the things that we've talked about. First of all, is really understanding what kind of conflict that you're dealing with. So consider back what we talked about: triggers for conflicts, the human behavior that goes into how we may or may not want to address conflict. What ways does our organizationally, culturally address conflict? Really thinking through what it is that you're dealing with. And then again, remembering to start with separating the people from the problem until you decide that maybe the person is part of the problem. The key to conflict and addressing it is to do it quickly and to act decisively. We as leaders can't avoid conflict. It's pervasive in our culture, in our environment. And honestly, some conflict is very good, because if everybody in the room thinks the same way, the organization isn't likely to have innovation, to move forward, solve challenges. So you need conflict, but the key is you can't let it fester or become toxic in your culture, because it will be. So use conflict as a springboard for opportunity. If you've got differing opinions going on about something, that may lead to some great innovation. So don't step away from it. Don't be shy from it. Definitely use it as an opportunity to go forward. So with that, we're going to move to questions. And we know that we've got a lot of people here for the very first time today. So the other thing we'd like to do is, we talked about Omnia's main offering being a personality assessment. And we're giving you the opportunity to take a leadership assessment so that you can better understand your personality and leadership traits. So Emma, our coordinator, has put a link to the assessment in the group chat. So please take a look at that. And then let's go ahead and take questions. If you want to just voice them, please feel free to do so, or put them in the chat. Actually, I think you can only put them in the chat. I'm sorry.
They can only put them in the
I forgot
chat.
when we get to this size, I can't hear everybody. But we're really going to have feedback problems. So
Yeah.
please pose your questions in the chat.
And Kevin, as we're waiting, just as a reminder for that link to the assessment, there is a promo code, so make sure that you write that down. And this applies to also those that maybe have registered and recorded it in the past. So we do have a question. Is the assessment open to existing clients as well?
Absolutely. For anybody who attended and dealt with the feedback issues in the front and all that, consider that our gift to you. So sure, if you're an existing client, but you want to use it as an opportunity to take the leadership assessment for yourself or someone else, go for it, Jackie. So I know we got some questions at the beginning. Oh, great. I was going to go and address that, but I'll take this one from Karen. What if the person in the conflict is your supervisor? So my hope would be that you're working in a culture that is open to feedback. I think it's so important. And I have to say, I got a call from someone first thing yesterday morning on my team who wasn't happy with me about a decision that I had made. And I had no idea that decision had a negative impact. And I know personally, I was so grateful that the person let me be aware of it. So we have a culture of feedback here at Omnia, of course, just by the nature of what we do. And I do try to be a leader who is open to feedback. So I think that's key. But you may be working with a leader who maybe never has had a direct report come to them with feedback. So I think the key there is to consider your words. Make sure that when you give feedback to anybody, you're thinking about the situation, respecting the person that you're giving the feedback to, and really honoring that it's in the spirit of making things better, right? It's not a personal attack, but it's just, I've noticed something that maybe we could improve, or something happened and I just thought you might not be aware, and I want you to know the impact it had on me personally, and make it all about yourself. But I think if your supervisor has never had feedback and you deliver it in a way that's positioned that way to make the business better, you consider the way you deliver it to their style of leadership, you'll find that feedback should be received openly. And if you ever want to just talk through it, Kim and I are here. You have our contact information in the end. We'll role play with you before you do it.
Absolutely. And I just want to tag on to that one too, Heather, is that I experienced something like that when I first came to Omnia, and it was over something very simple, as that my background was that we would check the out of office calendar, and if it was open, we could just put our time on there, and it was more of a, hey, Heather, I'm going to take this time off. Well, I did that to my supervisor, and we are complete opposites on the Omnia graphs, and her response was, well, you typically need to ask and get approval. And for me, I had to take a step back and go, well, what did I do wrong? And why was that the reaction? And I realized that the conflict was really because we just had two different mindsets. I didn't give enough information because I didn't say, hey, I checked the out of office calendar and this is open, no one else in my department. And so it was a conversation, and we laugh about it now, like 8 years later. We're like, it's a perfect example. Wendy's probably going to kill me because I say that every time I talk about conflict. But it was something so little that could have grown into something larger if we hadn't had a conversation to say, hey, maybe things are a little bit different here. What's the process? And here's my thoughts on it.
Great. Thanks, Kim. That's a great example. I see we have another question, and also a couple things just about the link to the free assessment and the recording. Everyone who registered for this webinar and attended today will get a follow-up link to share it or to replay this recording. And with it, we'll make sure you get the link to the assessment. So if you're getting error messages, just please watch out for additional info. We'll make sure you get it. And again, you can contact either of us if you're not getting it. I love this question from Samantha. I know, and you can tell there is tension and conflict within the team, but when you try to get more information, all you're getting is, it's fine, and you're not getting details. I think, again, this is when, as a leader, you've got to just put yourself out there and find any way you can to get more facts. One of it is, if whatever is happening that you know, their tension is existing, dig deeper into that. If it's somebody saying something or alluding to them, make sure there's a safe and comfortable environment for them to tell you more, and that they won't be called out for talking about their team or maybe pushing something that others on the team aren't more comfortable, but creating that safe environment so you can get facts to address the conflict. Another one is, it might just be your own observations. We all We know the body language of conflict, right? It's harder nowadays when we're working remote, but you can still tell when someone is tuned out, doesn't agree. You see a lot of nonverbal behavior with eye rolls, or maybe someone just grabs their phone and starts texting, or you hear IMs going off if you're in a meeting. That's a clear sign that people may be talking about the decision that's being made in a sidebar. As a leader, address it. And again, in a very safe environment. I'm getting the sense that not everybody's on board with this decision, or I'm getting the sense that some of you might not like the path we're going down. Can you please tell me more? What's happening? What are you thinking? Or find out who you can really push on and just ask questions directly. Kim, what do you think of that idea? Do you think that we should have offered this webinar today, or do you think we should have hit another topic? How do we make it better next time? Tanya, what do you think is going on with my feedback? help me make sure that doesn't happen again. So ask the questions, make it safe, show you're willing and vulnerable to learn and to have challenges on your team. Sometimes leaders can come across that we want it all perfect and we don't want bad news. I'm one of those. I have to remember that when someone tells me something that isn't great, that my first reaction is, thank you. That's great that you gave that to me, instead of, oh no, oh darn, oh gosh, that's awful. So Kim, anything you'd add to that?
Absolutely. So we also have found that sometimes just employee engagement surveys are very helpful with that.
Good point.
It's an environment where maybe someone's not comfortable to have their name attached to it. Doing an anonymous employee engagement survey, which is something that Omnia can help you with, may allow you to gather some of the information of that tension and conflict, to find out, is it situational? Is it a conflict with a person? Or maybe someone's just struggling with some decisions in the company, and what are the next steps with that? So that's also a great way to take a pulse of what your people are feeling. Heather, we have one more question. So, and it's from Nicole. How do you address conflict that is causing you interpersonal conflict? For example, you provide all your written work or ideas and not one is taken, and each one is rewritten or not good enough, or at least that is your perception.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I think one thing I just say is everything in this deck that we presented today, all the content works just as much personally as it does as a leader for your team. And again, we all have to deal with some form of conflict, right? Whether it be with our leaders or our direct reports or even some of our colleagues. And in an environment when ideas aren't necessarily, received well, or what it sounds like may be happening here is ideas aren't really received well, but then maybe they're repurposed and shown as somebody else's idea. That's a real problem. So again, I think the issue is taking these steps and addressing them. I would highly recommend understanding your own style and the person's style that you're dealing with. You may be dealing with a perfectionist. In Omnia speak, that's someone who wants a lot of structure and detail and process in their work. And if someone comes to that person with ideas on improvement or suggestions, they will see that immediately as criticism. So if that's the case, think about, one, how can you make sure that person gets showered with a lot of positivity and some great things that you honor or respect before you're giving ideas of improvement? Because if someone's been working really, really hard on something and they're that kind of a personality, they want and expected it that it was going to be perfect and that it wasn't going to get criticized. So just another nuance there. There's a lot in that question I'd love to unpack further, because it could be a number of things playing into that. But I think just key is first acknowledge, how are you feeling about the conflict? What do you think the other person is feeling? And how do you look at it from both sides, respecting those differences, those styles, to get to a win-win?
Absolutely. And I think communication too. So if you're feeling this, to have a conversation of, I want to be a team player, and I've offered some ideas. What can I do differently, or what can I improve on, or what are your expectations, so that, you level set on that same page. And I found that a lot of times when I approach it from a, what can I improve on, it lowers everybody's defenses to start that conversation.
Absolutely. Well, this is great. Thank you all for the questions and the conversation. I really appreciate it. We have just put in the chat a link to our resource page. Omnia writes a new blog every single week. And again, we post all of our webinars and you'll have the opportunity to share or re-listen to this one. We've got a new series coming out again in August, so please stay tuned for that. We know these are very different times. And we just thank you. Thank you for taking the time today to be with us. And we ask that you stay safe and stay well and come back. We'd love to continue to hear from you. You can contact me at these numbers or the email address if anyone wants to continue the conversation or do some practicing before you address conflict. We're here to help. So give us a call. So thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Kim.